Hello everyone, so today is Compounds. It is the 2nd of March 2021 and we are following on with the series of Chemistry, Chapter 2 of the Chemistry series in your curriculum. So this is the penultimate lesson because we've got one more lesson after this and then you've got a test. So today we're going to look at just compounds and the starter is reflecting on your previous lessons. So to start with, I'd like you to define the terms element and atom, and then for an extension, what do you think a compound is? So that is for today's lesson. So define the terms element and atom, and what do you think a compound is? So pause the video here, have a go at those, and then you'll find out the answers in due course. Okay, so an element is a pure substance consisting only of atoms that all have the same number of protons in the nucleus. And remember, an atom is the smallest unit of matter that forms a chemical element. So compound is what we're going to look at today, so I won't go through that just yet because we're going to go through it in the next slide. So your keywords today are compound and molecule. And we are going to define the term compound and recognise examples of compounds, describe the uses of some compounds, and explain why a compound has different properties to the elements within it. So, a compound is a substance made up of atoms of two or more molecules of different elements, and a molecule is a substance made up of two or more atoms of the same element. So what I'd like you to do is to go through these pictures, have a look at them, and decide which of them you think show an element or a compound. So pause the video here and have a go at that. And if you need to go back to the definitions, you can just skip back to the previous slide and have a look at the definitions there to help you with this. Okay then, so let's go through this. So the first one here is an element because it is only made up of one type of atom. So you've got the blue here and the red, but they are separate. They are not joined together with bonds. B is also an element because for the same reason, it's only one type of atom. Now C is a compound, and that is water because it is made up of oxygen and hydrogen. So that is two different elements that make up this compound. So C is a mixture. So that would be a solution because there are different atoms mixed in some water, and that is what makes up a mixture. D is a compound and E is also a compound because they have two different types of atoms, or two different types of elements make up the compound. So this one would be water again, because of the shape. It looks like Mickey Mouse ears. Okay, so compounds. When different elements combine, they form new substances called compounds. A substance made up of atoms of two or more molecules. So that is your definition. If you don't have it written down already, make sure you write it down. The atoms within compounds are bonded strongly together. So here we have water. So as I said earlier, that is made up of hydrogen, and the hydrogen would be the blue, and oxygen, which is the green. And this one is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide meaning there is one carbon and two oxygens. So the carbon would be the black element in the middle, the black atom, and the red would be the oxygen. So compound properties. The properties of compounds are different to the properties of elements that make the compound, and each compound has its own unique properties. So, for example, we have helium and oxygen. They are both separate here, and they are elements, so they contain only one kind of atom. And you've got water, that is a compound because it contains two or more kinds of atom, and water would have a completely different property to oxygen on its own and hydrogen on its own. So uses of compounds. So we can understand how different elements combine and how compounds react together. And then chemists can design new substances such as medicines and materials which are useful in everyday life. For example, we have Indium Oxide and Tin Oxide, and they can be combined to produce a transparent electrical conductor. Indium Tin Oxide is used in flat screens and touch screens for televisions, computers, and mobile devices. And indium is a very rare and therefore expensive element to obtain. So there it is, that's your indium oxide. And it is made up of several different coats. So you've got your hard coat layer on the outside, and then your electrode and electrical conducting bits in the middle. So let's look at compounds in the periodic table. So the next series of metals which were identified were those that were released into from their compounds by heating. So this is how the periodic table was slowly developed over the years, because we only originally had those native elements. If you remember back to the first lesson, we only had those native elements that were found, such as gold, copper, platinum, just all of the elements that are found on their own and not in rocks. So iron is found in an iron ore, which is a rock, and by heating it, they could get the iron and isolate it. So the identification has depended on both accidental discoveries as well as proper experiments. So there is your iron ore, so it's this reddy colour, and that is basically lots of iron minerals and iron particles spread out in through that rock, but it's also mixed with other elements because it is not stable, and it reacts with things such as water, which is why it rusts, and oxygen as well. So that is why it is normally found in a compound form. So Hennig Brand discovered phosphorus by accident in 1669 because he heated and purified urine to find the magic substance that would change metals to gold. So back then they believed that they could change any metal using urine to gold. So I think that's where the popular saying comes from, where you can change something into gold, change copper into gold, but you can't because it's a different element. So he discovered phosphorus because he basically heated up the urine and then released this gas. So the compound was discovered when in urine, and it's composed of 1 phosphorus atom and 4 oxygen atoms. So that's the compound that is found in urine. And here is a good depiction of him heating up some urine samples and watching it come off in gas form. So there's your phosphorus there. So you would have seen this in your periodic table if you'd looked. So it's an atomic number of 15 and its mass is 31. And that is the compound that was formed. So you've got your phosphorus in the middle and your 4 oxygen atoms. Later on then, than 1669, you had in the 1800s Humphrey Davy, and he used electrical or electricity-based experiments to isolate potassium and sodium from their ores. He sent electrical currents through the compounds to split the elements apart and isolate them. And he proved iodine is an element and not a compound. So he proved that that can be found on its own. And here he is. So there's your iodine. And fun fact, iodine has a magical property which can turn from a solid into a gas upon heating. So that is what this purple vapour is. That is it turning into the gas. So it doesn't have a liquid stage, and you'll learn about that next year in year 8, but it's called sublimation if you want to know now. And there we have potassium chloride. So this is one of the compounds that he would have split up to isolate potassium. You've also got sodium chloride, and of course that is your salt. So that is what is found in table salt. So why is water so different from its elements, its individual elements? Hydrogen is a gas at room temperature. Mixed with air, it will explode when ignited with a spark. Hydrogen atoms go around in pairs as molecules, and weak forces hold the atoms together. Oxygen, on the other hand, is also a gas at room temperature. It's not visible and you can't smell it, and it also exists in a pair as a molecule. And water is a molecule made up of one oxygen and two hydrogen atoms, which makes it a compound. There is a higher boiling point than hydrogen in this molecule compound, and it is liquid at room temperature. There are very strong forces that hold the atoms together in water. So why are these so different? So there you have your hydrogen, which is H2, your oxygen, which is O2, and then your water. Well, it'll be about the charges on the molecules is why the properties of water are so different from the atoms it is made up of. So if you see here, I'm not going to go into too much detail because it is a little bit tricky to get your head around, but you see here that hydrogen has a positive charge and oxygen has a negative charge, so they basically attract each other, so they have a very strong bond, hence why they are water, liquid at room temperature. So let's look at salt then. So salt is also a compound. Table salt is called sodium chloride, which contains one sodium and one chlorine atom. And sodium is a metal, remember, and chlorine is a halogen gas. Sodium is a very shiny metal when cut, and it fizzes in water. And chlorine is a poisonous gas at room temperature, but combined, they're perfectly safe to eat. So there is your sodium, and that is its configuration and structure. And then you have chlorine, and that is this green gas here, and that is its structure as well. And together it makes salt, which is quite bizarre if you think about it, because how could that very reactive metal and that really poisonous gas make something that's safe to eat? But it does. And again, it's down to the charges on the molecule. So we won't go into that too much more. We've also got tooth enamel. So tooth enamel is the hard stuff on the outside of your teeth that protects the inner side of your teeth, the inside of your teeth. So tooth enamel is a compound of calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen. Calcium, again, like sodium, is a shiny metal and it fizzes in water. Phosphorus is a poisonous solid and it catches fire very easily. And oxygen is a gas at room temperature and helps things combust. So individually, these things would not be too good to have as a part of your teeth, but mixed together, they form the perfect barrier to protect the inside of your teeth. So there you have your calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen, and that is the structure of a tooth. So you have your enamel, which is this white on top, and that protects this dentin layer, which is the underneath bit. And then you have your gum. So the enamel goes down just below the gum, and then you have the pulp, which is basically your blood supply, and then you have your roots and the bone as well. So that is how your tooth is structured, and the enamel is the bit that is made up of calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen. So what I'd like you to do is have a go at these questions. So I've got to test your understanding. What is the difference between an element and a compound? So again, I want you to reach back into your brain and your brains and think about that question, because I really need to ingrain that into your minds, the definitions for elements and compounds. Look at the structure of the drug cisplatin in figure 1.4.4d, which is this one here. Identify the names of the different elements, so individual elements, and how many atoms of each the compound contains. So identify the elements using a periodic table, and then write down, say, PT equals how many atoms. Cl equals how many atoms, N equals how many atoms, and H equals how many atoms. So count the amount of atoms that are for each element in this compound, and then move on to the next question. So using the correct chemical terms, explain what indium tin oxide is. So remember, we talked about this before, and that is a slightly more challenging question, but I'm hoping you'll be able to remember it. For question 4, use the periodic table to find out which element has atoms that are A, 12 times heavier than hydrogen. So you need to find hydrogen and find its mass, and then find an element or several elements that are 12 times heavier than hydrogen, twice as heavy as calcium, positioned 26th in the periodic table, so that would be the atomic number 26, just to give you a hint there, twice as heavy as neon, and with an atomic number half that of zirconium. So you need to find these elements, find out their masses, and then work out what the answers are from those, and then come back when you have done that. Okay, so what is the difference between an element and a compound? So an element contains one type of atom, and a compound contains more than one type of atom, which are joined together with strong bonds. For 2, look at the structure of the drug cisplatin and identify the names of the different elements and how many atoms of each the compound contains. So you have 2 nitrogen, have 1, 2, 2 chlorine, 1, 2, 6 hydrogen, you've got 3 here and 3 there, so that's 6, and 1 platinum, which is the central molecule here. For number 3, using the correct chemical terms, explain what indium tin oxide is. So indium tin oxide is a transparent electrical conductor made up of a combination of 2 compounds, which is indium oxide and tin oxide. These compounds contain indium, tin, and oxygen. And for question number 4, the first one, so hydrogen has a mass of 1. So you need to find the element that is 12 times heavier than hydrogen, so has 12 grams. So that would be your carbon, because that has 12 as its atomic mass. Twice as heavy as calcium, bromine. 26 in the periodic table is iron, because it has an atomic number of 26. And twice as heavy as neon, and with an atomic number half that of zirconium, and that is calcium. So those are your answers to those questions. And the final thing I want you to do is to have a look at this plenary. So I want you to fill out this table. So you've got elements in the compound, which, for example, are sodium and oxygen. Then you need to name the compound. So here we have potassium oxide. So you name which elements make up this compound. And you'd put that in this box here. You've got magnesium and oxygen. So I'll give you that one. That was magnesium oxide. So that's an example of how to do that. And then you have got this question here. So write the elements that each of the following compounds are made up of. So you've got SO2, CH4, CO2, and O2. So that's sulfur dioxide. This one's methane. This one is carbon dioxide, and that one's oxygen. So pause the video here, have a go at that, and then come back for the answers. Okay, so first one is sodium oxide, because you've got sodium and oxygen, and it only has 1 oxygen making up the compound, so you have oxide. Magnesium oxide, I gave you that one already. Potassium oxide is potassium and oxygen. Zinc and oxygen is zinc oxide. Iron chloride is iron and chlorine, and sodium and chlorine is sodium chloride. And then for the elements, you've got sulfur and oxygen, so you've got 1 sulfur atom and 2 oxygen atoms. Got 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms making up methane. 1 carbon and 2 oxygen making up CO2, and 2 oxygen, oxygen with 2 oxygen atoms making up oxygen. So that is the end of this lesson. Next lesson we are doing chemical formulae, so I will see you then.